The Exploratorium as a cultural institution exists within a larger landscape of the arts. And so in our move to Pier 15, we kind of looked back at our history and we looked at some of the core elements of our work in the arts. And one thing that is a new development in the world of the arts is what one might call social practice, which is artists who are working in a kind of more exchange kind of way with audiences, maybe not so artifactually based, but more about experiences. And Harrell Fletcher is one of the artists who's kind of a leader in this area.
We wrote Harrell into a grant several years ago to the National Endowment for the Arts, thinking he'd make a great artist in residence here. Because with Harrell, you never really know what you're going to get.
A lot of times the work that I do is at museums or art centers in which the normal culture is that you don't touch, you don't interact, you don't participate, you view. So here at the Exploratorium, that's the opposite. So in some ways it was great because it was very sympathetic to what I normally do. On the other hand, it's similar to what I already do. And so I was trying to figure out what else could I do that would maybe add a new dimension to the Exploratorium.
One of the things that Harrell's idea was born out of was maybe the building is not all that important. So he said, you know, you're moving from one side of town to the other. If you continue the straight line, just out the back door, where do you get to? And we arrived, I mean, I remember looking at the computer with him, staring at Google Maps, and it was zoom out. Okay, let's zoom out a little more. Okay, let's zoom out a little more. And pretty soon we were looking at Diablo out there, and he said, well, why don't we just leave out the back door of the museum and just walk there? And of course, my first thought was, well, that's crazy. The Windows was a roughly 30-mile trek over the course of 4 days from the back deck of the Exploratorium to the top of Mount Diablo in the East Bay, which is the highest point that's actually visible from the museum. And our challenge, in addition to just completing the walk, was to program a series of site-specific experiments along the way. They were aimed to illuminate the landscape. They were free and open to the public.
Maybe I should move to the end. These are actually just shade umbrellas, so if it's a real downpour, put the umbrella back in the bag.
1, 2, 3, go.
The first real challenge was to try to get across the bay. We're standing by it. There's a surge. I remembered a group that I had made contact with a couple of years before, actually, called BADS, the Bay Area Association of Disabled Sailors. And it's kind of just as wonderful and special as it sounds. It's a loose-knit assemblage of really interesting folks, disabled in various ways, who meet every Saturday or Sunday and go sailing. They shepherded us across the bay. So it was kind of a perfect way to begin the trip.
I'm really absolutely amazed at how it came together and how this journey that could begin at Exploratorium and end at Mount Diablo, the highest point, which gives a nice vantage point to look around, how it could start on one day and you could just step off the end of the pier onto a boat and take that boat across the bay and step off the boat onto land and walk through landfill and mud flats and Oakland and up and over a hill and then down into a hot valley and just keep walking. And as soon as you get over the first coastal hills there, you see Mount Diablo. It just takes over the view. And just to know that you're going to end your journey when you end it, we'll be on the top there.
We tried to make all of the activities that were planned related to the site in which they were occurring. And we also tried to make every sort of functional or practical concern interesting.
Maybe not. Let me hold it up to a radioactive source.
One of the things that I think is really interesting in this particular piece is instead of saying like, okay, let's just go to Mount Diablo and climb Mount Diablo and sort of experience the beauty and wonder that exists in a place like that is really removed from San Francisco. But what I thought was interesting is to say, like, yes, let's go and experience that, but let's experience everything in between as well.
We settled on the number 12. We went back and forth on it for a long time, but we thought a dozen people every day on the trip, hiking, camping, eating, being responsible for, was about as the max that we could really handle.
We wanted a group of people. There was a core group of staff, but that represented lots of different kinds of aspects of our work at the Exploratorium. And then we also had the idea of inviting maybe a member or just sort of enhancing that with a few other extra people. And so somehow in the whole formation of this group, the idea of Milo, my son, joining became an idea.
One of the things that's great about the project taking place out in the public is that people can join in and be a part of it. People who might not go to the Exploratorium, might not be aware of it, or might not normally be interested in it, that in some ways we're sort of taking aspects of the Exploratorium to the public.
One of the main things that we're going to be looking for is just the evidence of where these paths went. Have for them.
Okay. So what he's looking at is a historical photograph of this exact spot when there were light rail going through, and this median here was all track. Here's low tech.
This is a little nymph.
A tiny nymph? There in the bottom, right there?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Do you want to hold it? It can bite.
It can.
The grossest thing is this enormous cranefly larva. Let me show you that. What I wanted to try to do, and I hope it came through, was that for these places, it was like there was a window that you could look through to look at them and find out interesting things. And so my job was to provide people with tools so they could look through these windows as best as they could, and that meant the bucket of rocks and the microscopes.
We connected with several teachers who worked there, and one of them was named Valerie Gutworth, who was the dance instructor there. And we asked her if she wanted to be involved, and she was very enthusiastic. So she planned a free motion dance activity that took place in their beautiful grassy area right at the front of the school. And as it turned out, her mother co-edited a book of poems that came from John Muir. John Muir was a big inspiration in putting together this book. So she read from the book of poems and then sort of gave us these loose instructions for how to move. And we moved. And then after, I guess, that first day of hiking, it was a really special and welcome way to be in space.
Milo and I were interested in the walking aspect of the trip. And so we decided to do a little research around walking. Our starting point was Rebecca Solnit's book, Wanderlust, A Natural History of Walking. And in that book, Solnit, who's a local writer, talks about walking through all these different lenses. She talks about how walking as a theme traipses across different domains of thought. And so that became intriguing, and we thought, how could we present little insights into the activity that everyone was participating in along the way?
I would say that I used them, but it was mostly roughly the same angle.
Right. I was looking ahead of me, and I was conscious of my pace and trying to figure out, well, what is the pace that's right for me right now?
And it was just
a rhythm.
A rhythm immediately went into the rhythm.
Wow, that's a really interesting rhythm.
Physically, the most challenging part was Grizzly Peak. Really hard, strenuous. And after that, things sort of mild out, but it was still like you're walking for 4 days. I was tired of the first day.
I feel like we probably all got into a certain level of altered state of consciousness through the physical exertion, which, you know, I like altered states of consciousness, I guess.
So the first thing that I wanted to talk to you about today is our research project involving the federally threatened Alameda whip snake. They blend in pretty well.
And purple.
Purple, light purple.
The title of the project is "The Best Things in Museums Are the Windows." The reason I liked that quote was that it's an indication, even from the point of view of a painter whose paintings might be in a museum, that those are pretty good, the paintings are pretty nice, or the exhibits or whatever it happens to be that's in there, but that there's something about being in a museum that sort of heightens your sensitivity or awareness. When you can get somebody to sort of believe that something is art, then they look at it differently and they pay more attention to it. And so similarly, it appears that you can do that even with just an existing view. If you put it in maybe an office building, it won't have the same quality as it does when you're viewing that view from a museum.
So here's your skin, like normal skin, and it has layers. You probably heard you have your epidermis on the outside, and then the dermis in the middle, and the subcutaneous layer deeper in.
On one of the scouting trips, we found one of the oldest shops in Lafayette. It had been there for something like 40 years, just about 40 years, almost the exact same lifespan as the Exploratorium. And walked in, and it looked like it hadn't really been touched or changed in about that long. So it was really set apart from the other very new businesses that were around. And we discovered from talking to the guys who worked there that it had been started and operated just until a couple of years ago by its namesake, Joe Campana, who appears to have been a tremendously charismatic guy, a really talented musician, and just kind of like the boss of the place.
But one of his most well-loved phrases was, "Pay attention." Anytime you screwed up in his eyes, I heard that every day. And we even have that posted in the store right underneath a picture of him. Just the phrase, "Pay attention," because it tells you everything. It just means stay on your toes. You screwed up, you're going to screw up again, but do the best you can, right?
We kicked around a bunch of ideas and ultimately decided to have a Campana mini music festival, which drew from the talented students that take lessons there.
Fortunately, he found a nonprofit that's situated on a ranch that had space and welcomed us all in. And the program was wonderful. It had local people come and make a dinner for the walkers, and it was made out of sustainably harvested stuff.
We do everything from horse programs, which you're going to get a little taste of this evening, through to carpentry and woodshop tree fort building. We have an excellent nature program.
The programming kind of consisted of working with a wonderful scientist here named Isabel, who helped teach a very fun interactive lesson on the phases of the moon and how to really understand that. And it's something that 100 years ago, I think a lot of people had a good notion of how it worked. And these days we kind of lost touch with the moon. We also did some nighttime science of glowing things. So we got some glow sticks and took them apart and looked at the colors that they made as they were glowing. Had people play with flashlights and glowing things as the evening got darker and darker. And the evening concluded with a campfire that was absolutely wonderful, and a campfire story. And this was an opportunity to tell an old Japanese folk tale about the full moon and the princess of the moon. And it really brought the evening down to a nice close, and I'm pretty sure that those tired hikers, retired to their sleeping bags and fell asleep and hopefully dreamed about the moon.
He was an aficionado of light and images, and so I'm trying to channel Bob Miller's light block.
Bob Miller was a very early artist and had been an associate director for a while at the Exploratorium, an exhibit designer and a teacher, and he came up with so many of the iconic exhibits at the museum, primarily about light.
Here's a bunch of holes, and look at that, they're all, can you see that? I know I'm blocking some people, but so it's not so much the shape of the hole, but the shape of the object.
Little people.
Little green, red, and white people.
Yes, please do. Thank you. Yeah, I might see you guys tomorrow.
All right, what card is this?
Hey, Marcello.
Yeah.
It's an ace of spades.
Ace of spades. Okay, this is the ace of spades.
Ace of spades.
All right, now before I continue on with this trick, do you believe in magic?
With you at the helm.
Oh, yes. Okay, that's good. Because you're going to need it. You're going to need to believe in me.
Did you say embroiderers?
Yeah, she embroidered.
We're dissecting the public today.
I scavenge them for educational purposes. So this one's actually really beautiful. I found it right after it had been hit by a car. Slowly trying to take the skin away. So what I've done so far is here you have the leg, and the bee is actually pointing out exactly where I cut over you. Because this animal did not die of...
My favorite stop was Wayne Graham's sound installation. It came at, for me, and I think for a lot, probably one of the hardest physical parts of the walk. It was the hottest day. So we were all looking to get to a place to rest, and then coming upon this little zone of just weird sounds and trash making noise and very abstract. Just took, I think, the whole experience to a different level of surreal.
Make the pitch go from a low frequency to a high frequency, and you'll find a couple of nodes along the way that really make the material vibrate really rapidly.
I knew that Mount Diablo was going to be a really hot hike, so my thought was, what can I do to serve the people who are on that really hot hike? And an oasis came to mind really quickly. And I thought an oasis should be about water, so I thought I would focus on the science of water while making people comfortable.
So I've got a pie pan that weighs 173 grams. So I'm just going to put a little bit of water on there. And then I'm going to use the magic of adhesion and cohesion to lift the pan up.
When you're ready for it off your face.
I guess for me it was like not so much a demonstration as like an art piece, because it really fit in with the kind of work that I like to do, which is performative and serves a need, has a purpose, and is mediated. So for me, it felt like we were making art.
Milo and I also talked about the role of walking historically in contexts that were more for a cause, with some other symbolic realm.
It's one of the most common metaphors for someone's life, because it's this idea of someone walking along the road and different things come their way, but they just keep going forward until the end of the road.
We wondered if there was a kind of advocacy or ideological aspect to Harrell's walk. Were we walking for something? Was there a certain cause that in some ways subtly underlay his ethos as an artist? That's sort of an open-ended question, but we wanted to raise that along the way.
The trip was a great exercise in context building and context shifting. So it was tremendously physically demanding. I mean, it was a very hard walk. It was really long and it was very hot, as I'm sure everybody has said. And there was one time it was the end of the third day. It was right before we were going to do our final camp before we summited. And I was walking to the campsite. I remember I was almost there. And one of the roles that I played was sort of like a camp counselor along the route. So I was just making sure that everybody was in line. And where's Milo? Have you seen him? No. So I was waiting up for some folks. And eventually they appeared, and we were getting closer to the campsite. And I looked down at my feet, and I thought, God, my feet really hurt. And I was thinking, if I were just walking down the street, outside my apartment, and my body and my feet felt like they do right now after 3 days of 10 hours a day, I would call a doctor. I mean, I might be in trouble, but given the context of the project and the fact that we were all in it together and on this really wild journey, I just thought, well, it's fine. They're just my feet, and I'm about to stop walking for the day, and then I'm going to get a lot of sleep, and then we're going to get up and we're going to climb this mountain. And that's that.
The Geodesy presentation and the Cinema Arts program together, that was a really amazing program, and so wonderfully timed right before we were going up to the actual Mount Diablo site, and just hearing the whole crazy history of all of the little niche ins and outs of what it means to, climb a mountain.
We had started the third day with Fred Stein leading a light walk that he had sort of gleaned over the years from an Exploratorium artist and educator named Bob Miller. And that night at the campsite, one of the films they showed was called Light Walk, that was 16 millimeter and inspired by Bob and the work that he did. So it was pretty incredible to start the day actually doing a light walk, and then later in the day being pooped out at the campsite and watching this really lyrical 20-year-old 16 millimeter film about the light walk, and just to know that that was still so present.
Everybody had like really interesting stuff to say, learning about the way that different people are and what they have going on in their lives and what brought them to the Exploratorium, what brought them to this trip. And really I enjoyed getting to know the people, because the Exploratorium was what brought us here, but I took home way much more from their actual experiences.
It was really demanding. And I think that's obviously what made it so rich in the end. And I've seen, I see Diablo every day from the Exploratorium. And I remember the first time I saw it after, taking several days off after the trip when I came into work, and I saw it again, and I kind of couldn't believe that we'd gotten ourselves there on foot. I mean, it's pretty far. So that triggers something in the mind that says, well, gosh, I guess if I can do that I not only thought was maybe impossible, but initially kind of a crazy idea, that we could do all sorts of things.
Yes!
Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray!
Yeah, you see Twin Peaks to the left?
That's a far way, guys.
Wow. It's a little bit easier with polarized lenses.
I see the Exploratorium.
One of the things that I like to do within a work, which is kind of a selfish aspect, is that I oftentimes come up with something that I just want to experience, and that I'm fortunate enough, because of the nature of my work and the fact that institutions have been supportive of it, that these things get to happen. But I'm able to just sort of dream something up that I would actually like to experience, or like to spend my time doing, and then because of the hard work of folks like Jordan and Marina and all the other people at the Exploratorium who've made this possible, I get to have that experience and share it with other participants and the larger public.
Harrell did this thing where he just brought people together and then let go, and then set them out to have their own journey. So I thought that was profound and informative.
That's a wrap. Because now I have 8 hours of footage.